Greetings, this is Branko Malic with a second podcast in our series titled Conspiracy of Enlightenment, concerning and dealing with the book Memoirs illustrating the history of Jacobinism by Augustin Barruel. Just to rehash or recap what we said in the previous episode, this book by Baruel posits the thesis, historically, in my opinion at least, and to my knowledge, the first thesis of something like global conspiracy. I entitled this series Conspiracy of Enlightenment because, as we shall try to explain in this episode, it was in fact the conspiracy of Lumiere, French Enlightenment, certain intellectual movement, therefore not conspiracy, not primarily conspiracy of secret societies. And what I mean by this I will try to explain further, because I'm pointing this out because Baruel is usually looked upon as a father of Freemasons conspiracy theory, and most of the people who continued or built upon his work, and by this I mean almost exclusively Catholic writers and Catholic priests from 19th century and early 20th century, kind of extracted this Freemasons, his analysis of Freemasonry and activities of Freemasonry, and put it in the forefront. But in the actual book by Baruel, there are a lot of caveats about Freemasonry, and he is very eager to point out that Freemasonry was a kind of vessel used by the real conspirators, as he calls them. And those real conspirators were men led, as Baruel would say, by Voltaire, French feuilletonist, intellectual poet, celebrity of a sort, man of the world, who was famous for a few things, one of them being his excellent writing style, in the sense of his malicious wit. He was an expert in satire, and the satire is the most powerful, and in my opinion at least, the most powerful literary genre to fight the power, to fight the power holding politicians. For instance, it is a ridicule which extracts the real failings of your target, therefore not inventing them, and pushing them to the limit, trying to develop them in literary form, in an article or anecdote, literary anecdote, to prove your point. And for this reason, satire is not only humorous, funny. It is also very depressing, because it is a demonstration of absurdity of someone's standpoint. And Voltaire was always looked upon as really a master of satire. And to this day, when you take a not so contemporary left, but radical left, where I live in Croatia, and to a good extent in Serbia, for instance, you have these leftists, which are writers, journalists, and that are not your cookie cutter Hillary Clinton crying leftist liberals as in the West. Those are people who were in the 90s, for instance, prepared to risk even their lives for their opinions, for their beliefs, however that beliefs are wrong from my perspective. But they are not. They were men who and women who were ready to fight these nationalist governments that took off republics of ex-Yugoslavia. And from those, why I'm pointing this out, because, for instance, those writers had this masterful way of writing satire and being sarcastic. And to put this back into history, for instance, in 19th century, he was not a master, but he was very fond of sarcasm, was Karl Marx. Partly because he was, as a person, very scathing and sarcastic, and in principle, I would say, evil man, very evil man, passively evil, passively aggressive. But his writing, for instance, was completely imbibed with this sarcasm and deconstruction. It's always this negative. The foundation of this kind of thinking, and this is, I'm thinking of radical left, modern radical left, is negativity. And this is why radical left feels best when it is in opposition, when it is not in power, because its expertise is dismantling of other people's ideas, dogmas, and so forth. When they start to build their own dogmas, then you are in trouble. And this gets us back to Voltaire. Voltaire is considered the father of this kind of, one of the founding fathers of this kind of political action or intellectual action. And when we think about his other work, then you see how bad he was at other things, because Voltaire's idea was that he's a champion or a knight in shiny armor for the cause of philosophy against, quote unquote, superstition and fanaticism. Well, what was philosophy for Voltaire? To answer this question, we will have if we answer this question correctly, we will have a definition of the people who Baruel considers conspirators that brought about Jacobinism and French Revolution. Namely, philosophy, as Enlightenment thinkers and followers of Voltaire would say, is a kind of thinking that uses the light of natural reason. This natural reason is in fact taken from Christian, I would say, scholastic philosophy of Middle Ages, taken as granted, because this philosophy was not just inventing things, they were describing the reason as it is in more or less correct manner. And it is, I would say, mostly Aristotelian, and it denotes the human ability to make inferences. That is, that human is not only tabula rasa, or a blank slate on which the sense imprints are written, but he has this higher ability to construct and deconstruct inferences and judgments, and therefore come to truth. But Enlightenment thinkers, together with Voltaire, omit one very defined philosophy by omitting something, by forbidding something to this natural reason, as they call it, or mind, as I would call it. I would give it much more credit than them. They jettison the idea that there are things that are higher than senses can experience, and that therefore there are no truths that are higher than what senses provide us with. This is the most cookie cutter, most clean, most simple definition of what this movement was all about, essentially about. And I think it's very hard to debate this. So they had an idea of not expanding the mind, as astonishingly a lot of people think today about when you tell them about enlightenment. They had an idea of restricting it, and restricting the mind for them meant the abolition of superstition and fanatism. Superstition and fanatism, in Voltaire's mind especially, were Christianity, and above all Catholic Church. But not only institution, as some would like to think, but the very idea, the very principle of Christianity, the principle of God-man, of Jesus Christ, and of God's intervention in human condition, providing the human being with an ability, with a possibility of recuperating from what Christianity calls original sin. And original sin, or the fall of man, means that human condition, man taken by himself, is deficient. He is not entirely in accordance with his nature, and you need something higher to help you, to help you in every way, but most of all in thinking, to enable you to see the truth. You cannot see it by yourself. It is higher than you. You can't come to the higher without some aid of the higher. And this is, we could say, Christian metaphysics. I would say that whole metaphysics was like that. If you take, for instance, in ancient Greece, on the most developed metaphysics of ancient world was, in my opinion, Neoplatonism in its original form, epitomized by Plotinus, philosopher. We could call him Roman philosopher because he lived in Rome, but he was probably of Egyptian origin, where you have a philosophy whose purpose is also a salvation, soteria, as they called it in Greek, and where any form of this higher knowledge, that is to say, the knowledge that is not sense knowledge, is in fact some kind of act of mercy on behalf of what is higher. This was principle even in this pagan philosophy, and this gives us a historical paradox, because Enlightenment thinkers were very prone to this return to nature and return to paganism. But even in paganism, in its most developed form, you have this revocation of idea that all you can know are things of five senses. It is very explicitly so, maybe even more lavish and more extravagant than in dogmatic and disciplined Christianity, because they never, of course, Greek philosophers had their schools, but they never had a church, and philosophy was not something for the masses. There was no this idea of salvation, and there were no they missed a lot of things anyway, which you can find in later on with Christian revelation. But anyway, for our purpose, it is very important to clarify this, because Augustin Barruel considers French Revolution as a result of epistemic or epistemological, as we would now say, a revolution in the notion of knowledge. Somebody wanted to implement political action, political strife, not to acquire money primarily, to acquire political power for himself, as much as it was wanted to eradicate a way of thinking and a worldview and this is a very very important thing, and a lot of people miss it because for some reason, or maybe because they don't read Baruel, but even if they read him, they miss this point of his, and he is not very to be honest, he is not very clear about expressing it. Baruel was writing in this rococo style, French of probably French writers of that time, so you have him, it is very boring and tiresome book. And what I am talking about here are essential things which he gives in passages between which you have a lot of boring declamations about how wild this Voltaire is and so on, and this Freemasons later and Illuminati, and that was a way of that was a rhetorical form of that period probably. So it's a rather tiresome read for somebody who wants to have only these essential points and move on. But he, you got me to extract these points for you, of course. And this was the main thing. And now he locates this historically, the advent of this movement for epistemic dominance over Europe, and to an in extended way to whole world. In 1727, about in time when in the age when Voltaire returned to France from England. He was in exile because at that time in France you could get exiled for being impious. Well, this is something that most readers of Baruel today would not appreciate, and I am certain that very many people spinning around these Illuminati conspiracy theories would, if they would to pick sides, would side with not only with Voltaire, they would probably side with Adam Weishaupt and his Illuminati, because as we shall see, Illuminati really were most radically developed Enlightenment movement. They were most radical. So if you like this idea of not being anything above you, and using freely your mind and being free from any hierarchical structures as is the state and church, then Illuminati, if you are to choose what is for you, Augustin Barruel or Illuminati, I would suggest you pick Illuminati and try to look for a secret society, because this is, I'm just putting this forward because today you have this demonization of this strange group which had in my opinion enormous influence, if not direct lineage with things like communism and such. But those ideas, most people following alt media in effect are using Illuminati ideas, because we will work on this in our other episodes towards the end, but it is something I will repeatedly point out. And but to get back to Voltaire, Voltaire was was a kind of a leader of enlightenment, in a sense, not so much in a sense of his intellectual achievements, because his achievements in philosophical sense were minor. All enlightenment thinkers of French enlightenment, to my knowledge, are intellectual underachievers strictly in the sense of philosophy, in the sense of maybe natural sciences. Well, I wouldn't say that they were so outstanding in this. Also, they were more like ideologists, but they were better than in philosophy, because they called themselves philosophers, but they denied this these main principles of philosophy, and they most of all they denied the reason why people naturally cling to something which we can call philosophy. And this is something that Greeks, both Plato and Aristotle, write about it, called taumazein, the sense of wonder. Namely, the sense of wonder in Greek is considered to be the eros, or motivating emotion or disposition to philosophy. And it comes about by wondering about the order of the world, or not the laws governing mechanical universe as we think about it today, if we are influenced by scientists, but a sense of wonder over being in general, over its beauty, over truth, over things even as a starry skies, because Aristotle described it as something that was first awakened by looking at the skies, about the regularity and beauty and harmony of it, starry skies. And then people started to dig deeper into themselves, in fact, and start to asking questions about things they don't see, and yet they exist. And this is the motivation of philosophy, and this motivation by its very nature, if you think about it, is something that defies enlightenment. But because in enlightenment, the very essence of their quote unquote philosophy is to deny that there is anything, any kind of order in the universe. Now bear with me here. They don't say that universe cannot be ordered, but they say that in essence, in metaphysical sense, it is not beautiful, well disposed and truthful being. Voltaire was famous for his um feuilletons about earthquake in Lisbon from 1755, where there are a lot of casualties. It was a terrible catastrophe, and used it as a proof that this universe is not ordered, because this order, which wakes up the philosophical tendencies in man, is also a moral order. You can't have one without other. And Voltaire was very eager to prove by this Lisbon earthquake that there is obviously no God's providence, because why this happened if there is a God's providence? This is that way of thinking. That's what I want to say. It is in essence, and Baruel points this out in many places, it is in essence anti-philosophical. Now, philosophy is one mode of being for for human beings, and it is, in my opinion, not necessary for anybody. It's not something, if you're not inclined to it, you should pursue. I mean, it's not uh, it's not something a man essentially needs to spiritually survive. But some men are prone to it, and can make a lot of good for humanity at large by indulging it. This way of enlightenment way of thinking uh, revokes completely philosophy, because it comes to it puts you in the on the point where philosophy starts. That is to say, when you see something, and then it tells you this is all. You must not go further. Therefore, your mind is hungry, like your belly can be hungry, and he denies you food. And it has, just to jump ahead a little bit, it was this standpoint was most radically expressed by Immanuel Kant, in, especially in his masterpiece of 1781, Critique of Pure Reason, or Critique of Pure Mind. Kant was no conspirator. Barruel don't like him, but he was not, in my opinion, any of this. He was a very conservative, and he was, as much as I know about him, honest man, he would not be a good conspirator, political conspirator. But he radicalized this idea, and this is idea that is, as far as I can see, and as far as I can hear from scientists I know, something that rules the idea of modern science, and it is extremely subjectivist idea. We talk about this in our first introductory podcast, and this is in effect idea of Greek sophists, not Greek philosophers. So when Augustin Barruel calls Enlightenment thinkers or unthinkers or quasi-thinkers philosophists, I think he is 100% right. This is the right way to name them. And those people were one thing you notice if you really love philosophy, you'll notice with this enlightenment thinkers, they are extremely superficial because they always remain on surface, and but they were not uh, not downright atheist in a sense of denying God's existence. They were mostly agnostics, which is in my opinion still worse, because they deny possibility of knowledge. But problem is they didn't deny only possibility of knowing God, if he exists, what is his essence, and so on. They denied knowledge of what is good and bad. They would never explicitly say so, but it was in their logic. They placed good and bad, the moral, the virtues, in a political sphere, in something that man has to work out for himself and then implement it. And if you like this idea, you like French Revolution also. But if you like conspiracy theories, you must bear in mind that first conspiracy theory was exactly against this. And the methods Baruel employs for his deep politics research are exemplary even today. This is the way how you do it. And now we'll say something about this. Baruel, at the time, approximately when he started writing this book, there was available to him the correspondence of Voltaire in I can't remember now. I haven't noted how many volumes, but it was edition of complete Voltaire's correspondence, and he had a huge correspondence because he was a cosmopolitan. He lived in many places, and second, he was not seldomly banished from country to country for his ideas and for his political work. And through this correspondence, Baruel demonstrates that Voltaire was in cahoots with other Enlightenment intellectuals, first above all with de Lambert, mathematician and philosophist, who was in Baruel's opinion his right-hand man, especially in France, who was able, as he say, to, as Baruel says, to lay low, to hide his true opinions, while Voltaire was explosive and he was a public, flamboyant public personage, and he automatically made enemies and got into clashes and was not very good in insinuating himself, for instance, to Catholic clergy, which was extremely hostile towards him. D'Alembert was better in this. And the third correspondent, which is very important for our team, was Friedrich the Great of Prussia, Prussian king. And Friedrich was a man of enlightenment, and he was the great military genius. But he was a politician, and what is important to see here, Friedrich was not the only European crowned head with which Voltaire hung out and other sophisters. They were they were focused on winning the favor not of people, as some movie movies about French Revolution try to push you to believe. No, no, no. They were concentrated on crowns, on ministers that encircle the crown, because the kings of that age, anybody who thinks that absolute monarchy was a state where, or monarchy at all, was a state where king just made decision, everybody was forced to obey, does not know much about human nature and history, and this is very superficial stance. Those countries of those times, all those countries had a what we now call executive branch, and this practically government administration. It had kings had ministers that were the people that run things, and one of the methods in this conspiracy of enlightenment, as Baruel tries to demonstrate, was encircling crowned heads, especially King of France, Louis XV, and later the poor old Louis XVI, who eventually succumbed to revolution and ended up on scaffold, to encircle them with ministers that were of their mindset. Not necessarily their people, but of their mindset, enlightenment mindset. And this mindset was hell-bent on what Voltaire would uses as a postscriptum to his letters, écrase l'infâme. I hope I pronounce it rightly. This means crush the wretch, crush the prostitute, maybe even you can say this in jargon. And this wretch is Catholic Church, but also, as Baruel tries to demonstrate, probably to prove a point to Protestants and Englishmen, to Christ, also to the very idea of Christianity. And I think Baruel is very right here, because in some way, even if one is not Christian, is not from Christian culture, which is, in my opinion, also practically impossible to be in the West, because West is built, Western civilization is built on Christianity, and however you may think that you are against it, it is to extract yourself from it, even in this postmodern age, it is very difficult just to go to Hare Krishna and think that you become a Hindu or the member of some such culture alien to Europe. I think that doesn't work in reality. But even if you're intellectually not prone to Christianity, the problem is Christianity is intellectually, when looked upon as uh, intellectual not system, but let's say intellectual doctrine, or body of doctrines, is a kind of realization of a philosopher's dreams, because in Christianity you have this promise of satisfying all these passions that bring philosophy about. And this is why uh, church fathers of the early centuries of Christianity um, always, not always, but some of the most prominent among them were very eager to prove to pagans that Christianity is a fulfillment of philosophy, and by philosophy they meant mainly Platonism, and Platonism incorporates Aristotle, this division of which you may have heard about Plato, Platon and Aristotle. It's It's a Renaissance and modern thing. That was not so in antiquity. They were not looked upon as rivals. Although it's a little strange for a modern mind to comprehend, because when you read Aristotle, it really can seem contradictory to Plato. But I don't think it is in essence is so. So this is what they wanted to revoke, and I think that Baruel is here quite in the right. And what is very important about his method is that he's using this vast correspondence to prove the intention of conspiracy. And really, when you read him, the proper analysis would be to read the whole correspondence he read, so that you see that he wasn't really cherry picking things to insinuate something on Voltaire. But I think I unfortunately cannot do such a vast undertaking, and I don't have inclination to. But I do believe Baruel on this, because some of those incriminating quotes, especially in the correspondence between Friedrich and Voltaire, are very unambiguous, because it seems like they were trying to make a movement of slowly. It was meant to be a generation effort of generation or two, or maybe more, to eradicate Christianity, which they call superstition. This really is a fact, and to replace it with something, of course. And this is what they were replace it with what they were never very sure. We'll talk about it in next podcast when we come to Freemasonry. But there were a very interesting thing is what methods they employed, and Baruel uses he's a scrupulous researcher. Whatever people tell about him, I think I'm entitled to say, after I read a lot of books, I met a lot of people who had a lot of radical opinions. I guess I learned to discern when somebody is scrupulous in research and when is not. I think Baruel is very scrupulous. Not so much in a modern sense where you put 1,000 footnotes for everything you say. That was not the custom at the time, I think. But he is very scrupulous, and you see it from not so much relying on anecdotes. And those anecdotes, rare anecdotes he puts out, maybe the most interesting thing, because he knew some of those people. He never met Voltaire, of course, and he was a younger contemporary, but some of those Enlightenment thinkers he knew personally, and he knew people who knew them. For instance, he tells us about their methods from their correspondence, what they intend. And one of the things was to promulgate pamphlets and books at very low prices in order to get to the quote unquote rabble. And the rabble, dear listeners, would be you and me at that age, these poor working people. I imagine that we wouldn't be nobility or high bourgeois. And then when he demonstrates this intention from the letters, Baruel tells us, for instance, an anecdote of what one Paris bookseller told him, that some of those books he knew other bookseller who sold those books, and that he was extremely surprised how cheap they are. And then he figured out that there is somebody behind selling of these books, that they are not simply it's not simply a market move, because he's not making money, but there is really some political force pushing them around, pushing them into circulation. So that's his method, and that's, unfortunately, there is not that much of anecdotes. There are, but not as much as I would like, because in historical research today, historiography is considered as a science where you practically, if you don't have documents, you have nothing to say. But the documents are only, in most cases, anecdotes written down by somebody else. They are not so better evidence than anecdotes. The the events witnessed, really witnessed by person telling you this. Anyways, one of the main weapons of Enlightenment conspiracy or conspiracy of philosophists was encyclopedia. Encyclopedia, French encyclopedia, was a project of making a huge volume, uh, summing up the whole inventory of human knowledge, from rhetorics, arts, painting, physics, whatever. And it was as encyclopedias were later written. Then you have Encyclopedia Britannica and such. There were a lot of contributors, specialists, and so on. And what it's very interesting what Baruel says about encyclopedia. He says that the intention behind it, because it was completely 100% Enlightenment project, was to undermine Christianity and government, of course, and social mores, but in a roundabout way, because it was too big a project to if they would come out openly and do this attack, it would be forbidden, and there were great problems to for them to really push academia to push encyclopedia to be published. But uh, what Voltaire, excuse me, Baruel says, they used, for instance, they used subterfuge. They would make, and he makes a quotes from encyclopedia where you have, for instance, on some kind of Christian Catholic dogma, and it is explained in, let's say, orthodox manner, and then there is a footnote, and this footnote leads a reader to the chapter on superstitions. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, not to quote extensively from the book. And in this way, kind of roundabout way, gives you distorts, gives you implants you with their enlightenment idea. And I think he's right about this, precisely because this is the way to do propaganda. In propaganda, or I mean, in engineering or manufacturing consent, you have to imply the idea, not to put it out explicitly, because if you put it explicitly, people start to think. No, you put it implicitly. And this is the way to passively, to make people passively swallow it. It's like poisoning food in a way. And encyclopedia was, in Baruel's opinion, one of the main public relations stunts they did, and it was primarily precisely this, to turn, of course, public, educated public, not to poor rabble, the people who were to be freed, but bourgeois and noblemen. They were concentrated on noblemen, because when we talk about French Revolution, everybody wants to, historians always want to point out that it was a revolution of this budding bourgeoisie. But when you look at this from this point, it was more like a revolt of nobles. Nobles were, because people like Voltaire and others were concentrated where there was a money and protection and beautiful and naive woman. And this was, although noble, it's arguable that nobles were any wealthier than bourgeois at that time. They were concentrated where the real power, political decisions are. And I think Baruel is very right in pointing this out. And quotes he makes about, from Voltaire's writings, d'Alembert writings, and such, are pretty damning. Although most modern people would not look at them as such, when atheism, for instance, is a dominating worldview now. What I want to point out is that first conspiracy theory, first analysis of deep politics, was an analysis of the conspiracy of atheists, of people like Richard Dawkins. You could put Dawkins among Enlightenment people. Because he's as bad a philosopher as them. He has this crude Enlightenment way of thinking. For instance, Kant's way of thinking, and Kant was in fact radically enlightened by Enlightenment, was much more sublime and yields. You can learn something from Kant, and Kant went deep into problems. They weren't. They were, for instance, when you take people like Richard Dawkins today, this is anachronistic. The things he's saying are not developed atheism. You have atheism of 18th century, but you have atheism of 19th and 20th and 21st century, and those guys like him, this English, I would say, English atheists like Dawkins are very crude because they don't move, they don't develop. I say English because one of the there was one 19th century Dawkins, Charles Bradlaugh. He was a Freemason and leftist radical and quote unquote partner, I don't know what it means, of Annie Besant, a famous theosophist and heir to the throne of on Theosophical Society from Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. He was, when you read the statements of Bradlaugh and his political and theological views, that's pure Dawkins, even I think as a personage. So I just want to point out, and those were also radical enlighteners. And it is very strange that this kind of thinking, it seems paradoxical, comes very close to occultism. That is to say, to the body of beliefs that there is some kind of hidden knowledge that can help you transcend the limitations of human knowledge. Now, make a comparison, if you will. We started off by saying that enlightenment, the main purpose and the main proposition of enlightenment is that there is nothing beyond appearances. I think we can formulate it like this. Or if there is, as Kant would say, we cannot know it. So they invent this deism idea that God made the world and then took a eternal vacation, and you will never know about him, and so on and so forth. This is rubbish. Those are imaginary constructs, just to put people at ease. And this idea, so the seemingly absolutely objectivist idea that there is nothing but these things you see, hear, smell, and touch, turns and transforms into idea that behind these five senses there are some more sublime senses, and there is some more sublime knowledge, but not the knowledge of metaphysics, something that goes up and has to be given to you in a way where you have to be humbled, but something that goes deeper in the direction of downwards. That's how I see occultism. This is have to make a caveat here. This is what I think about it. But occultism has its political aspect, and in my opinion, occultism is a very political thing. To be more precise, it's another name for intelligence services, because the very nature of intelligence, of spy work or counterintelligence, is occultist, and we all it is very much intertwined to the point that you can distinguish one from another. And there is this strange proneness of those enlightenment light bearers to something that is occulted, that is magical, that is if not to say sensual, but sensual in some more, as they think about it, in a more sublime way, to some sublime hidden arcane knowledge. And there is affinity between those two. And not seeing this affinity is something that happens to most of the mainstream be it historian or philosophers. They just don't see this. That's because for various reasons. But this is apparent. And one of the things you cannot miss is, for instance, that first edition of Encyclopedia. If you turn to first episode, you'll see the image that is taken from this cover of the first edition of Encyclopedia. That's Lucifer, a light-bearing angel. And believe me, when Lucifer, Mr. L, comes into play, you will always hear something like this. Well, I don't believe in those angels, devils, and so on, but he is such a good symbol of what I believe in. And you can take, for instance, in praise of Lucifer or in praise of the devil by Max Moore, the post-humanist, where he does the same thing. He praises the Lucifer. He was very young when he wrote it, and it's really a stupid and infantile text. But what is interesting about it, he starts by praising the symbol, but ends up praising the real being. That's very interesting occurrence that happens when you let yourself, let your mind get to be dragged along this path. And what is interesting, that some kind of Luciferian, what we could call Luciferianism, at least its symbology, very expression Lumiere, the Enlightenment gets us very close to him. He's not Lucifer for nothing. Gets us close to what we call Luciferianism or Satanism. Something, in fact, inverting of religion. That is to say, not denying the religion, but inverting it. Because if you believe in Lucifer, we won't say you have a faith in God, but you have an enmity for God. You have in your head, you have an idea that he exists. And this is a very strange thing, coupled with this interest in occult. And this brings us to the end of this episode, because it brings us in a close proximity of that illustrious movement called Freemasonry, and the relationship that Enlightenment philosophists had with Freemasonry. As I pointed out many times, you will see that the Freemasons for Augustin Barruel take more like a position, more like a status of dupes than the villains. But as we shall see also, that's probably partly because of he was covering his ass. He was in England. Freemasonry was strong in England. Freemasonry in England is very different, was and probably still is very different than continental Freemasonry, and he put a whole lot of caveats about virtue of English Freemasons. But I think that was because he was not he didn't want to get extradited once more. He was a Jesuit at that time, defrocked because Jesuits were abolished at that time by papal bull at the pressure of, as Baruel himself says, philosophists, one of them being Carvalho. I think he was a prime minister or something like that in Portuguese, and he was the one of the prime movers in Europe in the movement to suppress the Jesuits, and Jesuits were sworn enemies of these philosophists, but Freemasons also, and the Illuminati, which will be very interesting and paradoxical later when we talk about Illuminati and these Jesuits conspiracy theories. How paradoxical it all gets. Anyway, for now, that would be, to sum it up, the conspiracy that bring about French Revolution was conspiracy of philosophers or sophists, and some of those had a throne to sit their ass on, like Friedrich or Joseph II of Austria and some others. And this was not something to be accomplished in one lifetime. Voltaire didn't live to see a revolution happening, but that was something that he was enshrined in as a saint of revolution when it happened. And it was accomplished by means of subterfuge, of subverting the secret societies, as we'll hear in another podcast, in third podcast, and of molding and shaping the public opinion. A public opinion of that time, to put a caveat, there was a public opinion of higher classes. But Baruel goes out of his way to point out that they corrupted and morals of simple people, but he is a royalist, and he is of this old-fashioned pre-modern mind, where he takes it as a normal thing that if you corrupt the higher, you by necessity will corrupt lower, which really is the case. I think even now not much has changed, only forms. And so there are excuse me, there are a lot more things to say about this, but I think this sums it up. We could talk, for instance, about so-called secret academy in Paris, that was founded by philosophists, and that Baruel tries to prove existed, and that it really was a center in at one point of this pre-revolutionary movement. But I'll leave you with. I hope I give you some appetizer and incentive to read the book yourselves. It is even in PDF. You can get it in public domain. But as I say, it's 819 something pages. It's a huge book. It's very boring at times, but it is extremely valuable. And so we have come to the advent of revolution. This was all what Baruel called anti-Christian conspiracy, conspiracy of atheists. When he starts, and this is the first volume of his memoirs, when he starts to talk about Freemasons, he starts to talk about what he called anti-monarchical conspiracy, or the conspiracy to overthrow first of all European monarchies, and then probably the whole world of wherever the monarchy is. And this is the context in which he puts the Freemasons and subversion of Freemasonry in France by philosophists. And he this is where we come to real preparations for revolution and the real inspirations of revolution thinkers, because he puts here some thinkers that were not Enlightenment thinkers proper, and he's very right about it. One of them being Jean-Jacques Rousseau, because Rousseau is revered by everybody who considers himself to be an follower of Enlightenment, but he was something of a oddball. He was a man. He was, for all intents and purposes, insane. So he was very prone to contradict himself and to change camps and change contradictory ideas on a fly. But he was a political thinker, much more so than Voltaire. Voltaire was, according to Baruel's analysis, more like a political schemer than thinker. Rousseau was a thinker, and we'll see how these Rousseauian ideas, or and to some extent ideas on Montesquieu and others, were used in subverting the what Baruel calls occult lodges. Excuse me, for forming of occult lodges that were instrumental in bringing about the French Revolution of 1780. This was Branko Malic of Kali Tribune, and occasionally of 21st Century Wire, signing out. Hope this was informative. and enjoyable podcast. You'll hear from me, I hope, in the near future when I find time and focus to continue this series. Thank you.